And here we are for another edition of the specialist preview on Sorare. First thing to note this week is the addition of all the European leagues has really boosted up the prizes in both Specialist Rare and also Specialist Limited. So we were 450 total prizes last week, we're up to 750 this week. So it really is a pretty significant jump, and there's going to be a great opportunity to win prizes this week. But also, on the flip side of that, there really are some great under 40 point players this week. We've had a few weeks where we feel like we're really scraping the barrel for players that you would consider as having a decent upside in the under 40 slot. It's not the case this week. We really do have a bunch of options. Okay, let's get started with the goalkeepers. So first of all, what I will note is that Liam Kelly appears to be a very popular pick this week. He racked up an 83 last week based on keeping a clean sheet and hoovering up a bunch of AA in the SPL. But what I will say is his price has really jumped, and he's going to be a popular pick. So if he doesn't score well, could break a lot of teams this weekend. So I've started off with a slightly different strategy, and the reason I say this is because as interest in this competition grows, there's going to be an increasing benefit in seeking differential picks, players that can really set you apart if they perform well. It does add an element of risk to it to not go with the crowd, but I think the upside there is very positive if fortune falls in your favour. So this is the first one that I will come into this week, and you might think, are you mad? Play the fixture. But a bit of context on this one. Erik Alshagel has gone from Utrecht to join newly promoted Emmen. Emmen are playing PSV, which on the face of it is an absolutely terrible fixture. However, PSV are playing Monaco for a place in the Champions League in midweek, and they're poised at 1-1 after the first leg. So the chance of PSV rotating this weekend is super high. And even still, you'd imagine that Alshagel will have plenty of opportunity to rack up AA score. So what we are essentially here is the clean sheet itself isn't as essential. What we are making a bet on is Alshagel not conceding 3 goals, because this wouldn't surprise me if this is the type of game where he could rack up a 20-point AA. So if you think about it, if you can get a sort of 20-point AA on a 35-point base score, you're going to be well in the mix. And he's also significantly cheaper than the most popular picks going out this week. So just a thought on relative fixture strength considering the likelihood of rotation. I think clean sheet is very unlikely, but just the context on the AA, he could still score well. And a lot of goalkeepers, it's either clean sheet or sub 40. Whereas I think sometimes you can pick these goalkeepers from so-called lesser sides, and they just have the opportunity to rack up really high AA up until the point they change the matrix. But for this weekend, Erik Alshagel would be my pick for the under 40 goalkeeper. Going into defenders, this is one player that you can see on the chart here I've heavily bought into. Kaseem Adams, when he played in the Swiss Super League before, was truly brilliant. His scores, interestingly, aren't shown on Sorare data because his time in the Super League predated Sorare. So he's been in the Bundesliga for the last couple of seasons with Hoffenheim. It didn't work out for him, and he's now come back on loan, this time to join FC Basel. FC Basel, one of the strongest teams in the league, and you'll see in his very first appearance, he put up a 54 without a clean sheet. Player lacking mark sharpness, lacking familiarity with his teammates. Going 20 points AA without a clean sheet is a really promising sign. He didn't play in 291 because the registration dates for the Europa Conference League were actually just before, it was a couple of days before he signed for Basel, so he was unable to play in the second leg of Crusaders, but I'm fully expecting him to play this evening in the match that they have in the third round tie. I think that will really put him on people's radar because you look at the moment, since he's joined, his price has barely moved. Like it jumped up and then it came back down. It sort of hovered. It's been up and down and around the 0.1. If his AA is so promising through the fact that he wins duels, he plays out from the back. He racked up almost 80 passes in the first match. That puts him in a category of defenders that is, frankly, far more valuable than the 0.01 that he's currently trading for. So I am very, very bullish on Kaseem Adams, and I think that this weekend could be the weekend that he really steps onto people's radar and puts up a really strong performance in Specialist. Next up is Loic Bade. So Bade plays for Rennes in France. They've got a pretty decent fixture this weekend at home to Lorient. And why is he in here? Well, he was injured for a lot of last season, but when he did play, his scores were pretty impressive. So he is actually at DNP in his last 15 at the moment. So people may be heavily overlooking him because he just doesn't have any score in his last 5. Ultimately, he's in the mix here because he is going to be covering for another injured centre back, which is Wade Amare. So Bade, I think if he starts, he's got real promise for putting up a high AA score. And the fact that he is completely off the radar, there's barely any movement in his price for the last month, suggests that people are not jumping into him for Specialist. I admit he is slightly more expensive than the other options mentioned, but he's the kind of player that you could roll in 2023 afterwards and get some real use out of him. Next up is a player who I think will really benefit from the change to the new matrix with regards to possession loss, and that's Vanderson at Monaco. He plays as a very advanced, very attacking right back. Sometimes has popped up at right wing, but I think he's one of these boom or bust players that is in Specialist because historically he has been absolutely punished by possession loss. But he is capable of grabbing a decisive. He's got some really decent scores in his history here. Ultimately it is a play on him getting a decisive, but I think he is a player that you could buy and hold, and he will definitely benefit from the new matrix as well, in my opinion. Moving on to the midfielders, we have Nicolas Castro of Genk, and he is another player that I am very excited about. For reference, Mike Tressor does still qualify this week, so he's another player that you could consider, but as he's previewed last week, we're going to look at his teammate Nico Castro. Castro made his debut last week for Genk, came off the bench and racked up 8 AA points in 29 minutes, which is pretty impressive. It also suggests that he's going to be used in a more offensive role than he was at Newell's, which should really help his AA and his potential for decisives. And I think with all the injuries and departures at Genk at the moment, he's got a real shot of playing this weekend. What we could see is Castro come in centrally, and we could see Tressor play slightly wide, or even as the central striker if Dessers is leaving, because he's been heavily rumoured with a departure this week. So there's real big changes coming at Genk, because they seem to be selling their entire forward line. But context, I think Castro could be in with an outside bet of starting this weekend, and it's a pretty favourable fixture at home to Eupen as well. So definitely one to consider, and also another one of these players that I think you're catching them as they're coming into a team. You get them for Specialists for a couple of weeks, and then you can roll them into a challenger or even under 23 team and get a lot of use of them after this tournament as well. Talking of players that are coming in as a result of other players being unavailable, it's Mohamed Kudus at Ajax. So Edison Alvarez is going to be suspended for the very first match of the season, so there is a really good shot that Kudus comes in and plays this weekend against Fortuna Sittard. Ajax smash most teams in the league. Fortuna are one of them, so the chance of Kudus coming in and putting up a decent score is pretty high. I think he doesn't have an incredible scoring history, but a ton of these are subs. He was then used in different positions, so if he comes in a more central box-to-box role, then I think he could really shine this weekend. Talking of players who have moved in different positions, next up is Thomas Suslav. So Suslav was used all over the park last season. He was used as right wing, he was used as centre defensive midfielder, he was used as centre attacking midfielder. In pre-season, he even popped up at left wing back. But the last couple of games, Groningen's manager seems to have settled on a formation which involves Suslav playing left wing, which should really, really impact his decisive capabilities. If you have a look at his scores in the past, a lot of his best scores have actually come for Slovakia, where he has been used in a more offensive position. And what I think is really positive to see is that he is likely going to be in the front three this season, and he opens up the season with a game against the newly promoted Volendam at home. So I'm really, really excited about what Suslav could potentially deliver this weekend, and he's definitely going to be going into one of my teams. Next up is his teammate Cyril Nigong. We are really, really looking here at the opportunity to double up on Groningen, who have a wonderful fixture and two players that are very, very capable of decisives that slot into the eligibility for underdogs. So there is an interesting thing about Suslav is that he has forward cards as a rare, he has midfielder cards as a limited. So if you're playing in rare, you could go double forward. If you're playing in limited, you could go with a Suslav midfield card and a Cyril Nigong forward card, and I just think it's a really interesting play. There's been a little bit of movement in his price, but I just don't think that many people are looking at Groningen as an option. But I think based on the fixture, it is a really, really positive fixture for them this weekend, and I think they could surprise a few people. Next up, we have a player returning from injury and a second player from Rennes that features this week, and that is Kalamal Dean Suleimana. He is another player, like Bade, who is a complete zero. He is a DNP in his last 15. He really struggled with injuries last season, but he's back in the mix now, and there's a good chance that he could feature this weekend against Lorient. He is another player that has two positions. He has some forward cards, he had midfielder cards. I've previewed him as a forward because his forward cards tend to score much better in the game. Lorient at home is a great fixture, and I think even if he comes off the bench, he's still capable of grabbing a decisive. So another one to think about this weekend. Last but not least is one player that I think is completely off the radar, and that is Alex Milan, who is now at Famalicão in Portugal. He is a really interesting one because there's not many cards of him. He had a couple of cards minted when he was at Cercle Bruges. He then went on loan to Union Saint-Gilloise, where he was unable to get in the team ahead of the absolutely on fire in form Dennis Undav and Dante Vanzier. So there was no shame in not getting into the USG forward lineup last season, but what that does mean that he's got a series of essentially sub appearances that are really dragging down this L15 score. But what is quite exciting to me is that he's now moved on loan to Famalicão in Portugal. They've got a wonderful fixture this weekend against Estoril Praia, who are one of the weaker teams in the league, and essentially the path has been cleared. Famalicão's main striker from last season has moved to Braga. Milan's been playing in the pre-season matches. He was even on penalties and scored in the last pre-season match. So he's someone that I'm really quite excited about. And Famalicão, they seem to have a habit of developing forwards either on loan or developing forwards to sell. So might not be known to many, but it was where Tony Martinez had an incredible run when he was playing here before he went to Porto. So they're quite good as a club for strikers, particularly whoever locks in that spot. And from what I've seen online, it does look like that Milan has locked in that spot and will be the starter going into the season. I think because he's not auctioned, he's really, really off the radar. He's 0.012 is his floor. He's been selling for lower than that. It's just a really exciting prospect and someone that I think could be a wonderful differential this weekend. I hope that's been valuable. I hope that's helped. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, and see you next week.